Why you think they Duke the Jeweler, they really couldn't get him? That's why they had, come on, homie. If you coming in to check in, and you got to stay with this group and they taking you around, ain't taking you around and introduce you to people. They taking you around so everybody get a piece of you.
Houston police say the guards saw two men in masks with guns approach the victim, who was parked in the parking lot around 3 o'clock.
J. Prince Jr. has allegedly been under investigation in connection with the murder of Duke the Jeweler after a dice game that reportedly began as a scam and ended in fatal violence. The sequence of events surrounding this case is disturbing, not because it was chaotic, but because it appears methodical. What looks on the surface like a reckless street dispute is, according to multiple accounts, tied to a long-running operation that had been quietly functioning in Houston for years. To understand how Duke ended up dead, the setup that came before it matters just as much as the final moments. Before getting into that operation, it's important to understand who J. Prince Jr. is and why his name alone carried so much weight. He's the son of J. Prince, the man who built Rap-A-Lot Records into a powerhouse and earned a reputation for protecting artists and handling business with discipline. But according to allegations that have followed this case, J. Prince Jr. moved very differently. Where his father focused on structure and legitimacy, J. Prince Jr. is accused of using the family name as leverage, not to build, but to extract. What makes this situation harder to ignore is his background. By most accounts, J. Prince Jr. did not grow up struggling. He attended private schools, lived in stable neighborhoods, and never lacked access or opportunity. Yet despite that, he allegedly pushed an image that leaned heavily into street credibility. The contradiction stands out. He was already wealthy, already connected, but reportedly wanted to be seen as something else entirely. That desire, according to people familiar with the situation, became the foundation for how certain visitors to Houston were targeted. The alleged operation itself was not random. It followed a consistent pattern. J. Prince Jr. and a small circle around him were said to run controlled dice games using loaded dice. 3 individuals were regularly named as part of this setup: Lil Cam, Wolf, and Big Caprice. These were not casual participants. According to accounts tied to the investigation, each person had a defined role, and the games were structured to look informal while remaining fully controlled. The first step was selection. Targets were not chosen impulsively. They were successful rappers, athletes, and business figures coming through Houston. People whose social media already displayed the lifestyle: jewelry, cars, travel, spending habits, all of it was visible. That information was allegedly studied in advance. The goal was to identify not just who had money, but who would feel comfortable flashing it. Once identified, the approach was subtle. J. Prince Jr. would allegedly reach out personally, leaning on Houston hospitality and his family's reputation. The message was always friendly, supportive, and familiar. Visitors were taken to high-end restaurants, brought into VIP sections at clubs, and introduced to local figures. Nothing felt rushed. Trust was built first. By the time money entered the conversation, the target already felt protected. Only after that trust was established would the dice game be mentioned. It was framed as casual, almost an afterthought, a chance to relax, maybe make some quick money. The game would begin with standard dice and low stakes, allowing the visitor to win early. Confidence grew, and without announcement, the dice would change. From that point on, the pattern shifted. The 3 crew members passed the dice in a specific rotation, winning consistently while allowing just enough small wins to keep the target engaged. The losses accumulated quietly, and by the time it became obvious, walking away was no longer simple. This is where Duke enters the picture. Duke was not a reckless outsider. He was a respected jeweler in the hip-hop world, a businessman with real connections and real money. His success made him visible, and visibility, in this context, carried risk. When Duke came to Houston, he reportedly received the same treatment as others before him: full access, full hospitality. And according to the allegations, that path led him directly into a situation he was never meant to win. J. Prince Jr. personally showed Duke around the city, taking him to exclusive spots and introducing him to local figures who made Houston feel welcoming. Everything about the experience was designed to feel personal. Duke wasn't treated like a guest passing through. He was treated like someone being embraced. From Duke's perspective, this felt like genuine friendship forming in real time. He believed he had found real connections in Houston, not realizing the situation was being carefully managed around him. After a long night of partying, the tone shifted in a way that felt natural. J. Prince Jr. suggested they shoot some dice. There was nothing suspicious about it on the surface. Duke was relaxed, comfortable, and trusting the people around him. To him, this wasn't a setup. It felt like another layer of the Houston experience he had been invited into. A casual moment to unwind and maybe make some extra money while having fun. What happened next is where everything went wrong. During the dice game, something catastrophically unexpected occurred. According to accounts tied to the situation, someone within J. Prince Jr.'s crew made a critical mistake. The loaded dice, which were supposed to stay within the rotation of the crew, were accidentally passed to Duke. Instead of the game being controlled against him, Duke suddenly held the advantage. Once Duke began rolling, the outcome changed fast. Started winning heavily. Not small amounts, but hundreds of thousands of dollars. In a fair game, that would have been chalked up to luck. But in a rigged operation, it was a nightmare scenario. The crew watched their own system turn against them in real time. They couldn't stop the game without drawing attention. They couldn't accuse Duke of cheating without exposing themselves. Every option they had led to the same problem. Their entire operation was at risk. As the winnings stacked up, frustration became visible. This was never supposed to happen. The loaded dice were meant to guarantee control, not create losses. But Duke didn't see any of that. From his point of view, he was simply having the night of his life. He believed luck was on his side. He felt grateful to the people who brought him into the game, unaware that the energy in the room had shifted against him. That misunderstanding would prove fatal. Duke walked away from the table thinking nothing but good things. He didn't know that, in the eyes of the crew, he had crossed a line he never even saw. Letting him leave with that money wasn't just a financial hit, it was a threat. If word spread that the dice game could be beaten, the entire setup would collapse. Their reputation depended on silence and control. From that moment, the situation stopped being about money alone. According to allegations surrounding the case, the decision was made that Duke couldn't be allowed to talk. A plan was formed quickly, but not sloppily. Duke was invited to a Boosie concert that same night, framed as a celebration of his big win. To Duke, it sounded like more hospitality, another chance to enjoy the city with people he now trusted. At the concert, Duke was in high spirits. He was openly enjoying himself, flashing his jewelry, carrying designer bags, and still holding the cash he had just won. Everything about his behavior showed comfort and confidence. What he didn't realize was that the concert wasn't just entertainment. It was an opportunity. His movements were observed closely. Timing was studied. Vulnerability was identified. This was no longer about a robbery alone. According to how the events have been described, the plan had escalated. The concert provided cover, noise, and chaos. It allowed coordination without attention. By the time the show ended, the decision had already been made. When Duke walked to his car alone, he had no idea he was no longer leaving with friends watching over him. That is when the situation crossed a line there was no coming back from. Multiple attackers approached Duke in the parking lot and confronted him directly. They demanded the money back. Not a portion of it, all of it. Duke refused. From his perspective, he had won that money clean. There was no reason to give anything back, and he was not willing to be intimidated into handing it over. That refusal changed everything. What made the moment especially dangerous was what Duke now represented. He had seen their faces. He had experienced the operation firsthand. And he had walked away with money that was never meant to leave their control. At that point, letting him live became a risk they could not afford. Duke was shot multiple times in that parking lot and killed on the spot. What happened next is one of the clearest indicators that this was not a robbery gone wrong. Duke was wearing hundreds of thousands of dollars in jewelry. Chains, watches, rings, all untouched. The attackers took only one thing: the cash from the dice game. That detail matters. It shows intent. This was not about valuables. It was about recovering specific money and removing a witness who now knew too much. Duke the Jeweler did not die because of random street violence. He died because he accidentally won money that was never supposed to be winnable. He died because an organized scam could not survive exposure. And according to allegations surrounding the case, greed mattered more than human life. That is what separates this from a spontaneous crime. It was controlled, was calculated. Duke was not the only person pulled into this orbit. The most high-profile case connected to this pattern involves Takeoff and the events that led to his death. According to multiple sources, Quavo and Takeoff were in Houston and received the same treatment others had before them. Hospitality, access, familiarity, the slow construction of trust. The difference this time was the scale. The money involved was significantly higher, and so were the stakes. The dice game that night was not casual. Large sums were on the table, the kind of money that turns tension into pressure very quickly. Quavo was playing, and at first nothing seemed unusual. But as the game went on, the losses began to pile up. According to accounts, Quavo lost more than $100,000 in a short span of time. That kind of loss is not easy to ignore. Quavo was not inexperienced. He had been around gambling, around money, and around people who play dice seriously. He noticed the pattern. The same three individuals continued to win. The dice kept rotating between them in a specific way. It stopped looking like chance. It started looking structured. That realization shifted the mood immediately. Quavo began calling out the game, challenged what was happening openly. The crew attempted to deflect and downplay it, but the losses were too large and the pattern too obvious. Tension escalated fast. Voices rose. People started choosing sides. In that chaos, shots were fired. Takeoff was not part of the argument. He was not involved in the dispute over the game, but he was there. When the gunfire started, he was struck and killed. Later, Lil Cam was arrested in connection with Takeoff's murder. That arrest did not exist in isolation, tied directly back to the same circle that had been named in other incidents. As information surrounding these events began surfacing, attention turned back to J. Prince Jr. The response that followed was not silence, but damage control. Interviews were given, statements were made, narratives were shaped carefully. But what stood out was not what was said, it was what was avoided. Direct questions were met with deflection. Key details were sidestepped. Body language suggested discomfort rather than clarity. At that point, the story was no longer about isolated incidents. It was about a pattern. And once that pattern became visible, it was no longer possible to look at any of these deaths as unrelated. As the investigation widened, new claims began circulating that added another disturbing layer to the story. According to WAC 100, J. Prince Jr. may have been cooperating with federal authorities while all of this was unfolding. WAC 100 claimed he overheard a phone conversation in which J. Prince Jr. referenced a number, somewhere between 80 and 100 people, spoken about in a way that suggested advanced knowledge of law enforcement activity rather than speculation. What made the claim more unsettling was what followed. The very next day, federal agents conducted coordinated sweeps across Houston that resulted in arrests matching that same number. If that account is accurate, it raises serious questions about J. Prince Jr.'s role behind the scenes. It would suggest he was not only involved in criminal activity, but also providing information to authorities, using his position within the street and music communities to feed intelligence upward. That possibility would explain a pattern that has become difficult to ignore. While members of his circle have been arrested one by one, J. Prince Jr. has remained untouched. Multiple arrests have been made in connection with the dice game operation. Lil Cam is facing murder charges. Other associates have been taken into custody on a range of serious offenses. The structure around him is being dismantled piece by piece. Yet J. Prince Jr. remains free, publicly visible, and seemingly unconcerned about the scope of the federal investigation. That kind of calm rarely exists without protection. The impact of all this has extended far beyond courtrooms and arrest records. Houston's reputation within the hip-hop world has changed. What was once considered one of the most welcoming cities in the South is now approached with hesitation. Promoters have reported difficulty booking artists. Tours skip the city altogether. The same hospitality that once defined Houston has been overshadowed by suspicion. Artists who travel there now move differently. Invitations are questioned. Friendly gestures are examined. A suggestion to shoot dice no longer sounds harmless. It sounds dangerous. The trust that once existed has been eroded, replaced by caution shaped by very real consequences. What makes the allegations against J. Prince Jr. especially damaging is how deeply they cut against the values hip-hop was built on. The culture has always emphasized solidarity, protection, and uplifting those who come from struggle. According to these allegations, those expectations were turned into tools. Familiarity became bait. Respect became leverage. Community became a hunting ground. J. Prince Jr. did not come from nothing. He inherited a powerful name, access to influence, and respect within the industry before proving anything himself. Instead of using that position to protect or guide others, the accusation is that he used it for personal gain, regardless of the damage left behind. That choice is what makes the fallout so severe. There are lessons buried in this story, even if they come at a high cost. Trust should never be automatic. Last name, a reputation, or an introduction is not proof of character. Every individual earns credibility through consistent actions, not inherited status. Artists also need stronger systems of protection when they travel. Verified local contacts, clearer education about common scams, better communication could prevent situations like this from repeating. Above all, this case reinforces a hard truth. When something feels off, it usually is. No amount of money, access, or perceived friendship is worth ignoring that instinct. What happened here shows how quickly a night meant for connection can turn into something irreversible. The greatest threats in stories like this rarely come from strangers lurking in the shadows. More often, they come from familiar names, familiar faces, and people offering friendship wrapped in hospitality. Traditional security focuses on physical danger, on obvious risks that can be seen and avoided. What this case exposes is something different: psychological manipulation. The slow construction of trust, followed by its deliberate exploitation. By the end, this story is no longer just about loaded dice or a jeweler who lost his life. It is about how culture itself can be weaponized. How shared values, respect, and reputation can be twisted into tools for control. And how unchecked greed, when protected by influence and fear, can lead to irreversible consequences. It is important to be clear about one thing. Much of what has been discussed comes from allegations, street-level accounts, claims made by figures such as WEC 100. The full truth has not yet been established in court. What is known is that federal authorities are actively examining J. Prince Jr. and the operation connected to these events. The investigation is ongoing, and it has not reached its conclusion. What is also undeniable is the damage already done. Duke the Jeweler is dead. Takeoff is dead. Multiple families are left dealing with loss that can never be undone. Careers have been altered, trust has been broken, and the reputation of an entire city has been shaken. These are not abstract outcomes. They're real consequences tied to real decisions. As federal scrutiny continues, more arrests are likely, more details are expected to surface. And as they do, the picture surrounding this operation may become even clearer. Whether through indictments, testimony, or evidence, the full scope of what happened is still unfolding. At its core, this case serves as a warning, not just to artists, but to anyone moving through spaces where reputation substitutes for accountability. Trust should never be automatic. Familiarity should never replace caution. And no opportunity, no matter how attractive it seems, is worth ignoring warning signs that something is wrong. Street Wars will continue documenting stories like this, not to sensationalize them, but to examine the patterns that others overlook. Understanding those patterns is often the only defense against repeating them.